too low. So I just want to thank you guys for having us out here for this event. For Graciela and Media and everybody who put this together. This is a historic moment, as the media was talking about, to recognize this revolutionary plan. But to kind of start off, to look at, start with a quote by Martin Luther King that nobody ever quotes. In one of his last speeches, he says, if you take away all of our recourse to address the government, then all we have left is violence. And what was happening during this time is there were several people, because of Matanza, because of what the Rangers were doing, that didn't have a legal recourse anymore. They were not, the governor basically had given them carte blanche, and the Rangers were not being prosecuted or even arrested or anything like that. So they chose the path of violence. And this plan in itself, as Emilio was saying, is a Mexican-American plan. It comes from deep in the heart of South Texas. And yeah, there's a lot of debate out there about that. Like, it came from Benonseki and all different places. But Emilio's right. It came from these people around here who were being terrorized by the violence of the Texas Rangers and the fact that the government were not protecting them. So when you don't have the protection of your own government, what do you turn to? And this is what happened here. And of course, we know that the start date was supposed to be on February 20th. There were some events that occurred, like the train derailment outside of Brownsville. That was led by Luis de la Rosa, Anasota Pizania, and others. The Norias Ranch raid, which took place a couple months before that. And there were other skirmishes that occurred, but most of the violence that occurred in the Plan de San Diego's name was not by the revolutionaries here, but by the Texas Rangers and the Army and others who used it as basically a reason to kill more, to be able to kill more people, more Mexicans. And their ultimate goal, which started years before, of taking the lands. So when we look back to, with my own family history, my fifth great-grandmother was Estefana Rosecochia Cavazos de Cortina. I come from, which is Juan Cortina's mom, but I'm related to them through the Cavazo line, which was her first husband. And so I've done a lot of research on her, and she held on to those lands up until the 1850s, when the state of Texas divided her lands into six different portions, and she was left basically with what is now the Carmona Ranch outside of Brownsville. And that's what sparks the Cortina Wars in a lot of ways, which is what it's known as. But her goal was she helped establish education in South Texas. She established churches, and she owned one of the most profitable areas, which was basically the Espiritu Santo land grant, which is around Brownsville, South Padre, the coast, right? She controlled that whole port area, which is why she was targeted. But even up until she passed, she always held on that education was the key to getting us out of this situation. And from that line, our family has lost land. We've lost a lot of things. And when even my great-grandfather, during the Matanza, had to take his family into Mexico for 2 years because the violence was too bad here on this side. And they ended up losing a lot of their lands here. And now we have basically not even half an acre left outside of Donna. But we still have that. And one little piece there. But these stories are the stories of the people, of the families that have been affected by this violence. My grandfather told me all these stories until he passed away. But he was in his 90s, all the way up until 2010. So he remembered all this, and he told me these stories, which is why I'm invested in this history. Why I'm invested, because it happened to us. All of the families here are affected by it. From South Texas, your families were affected by what happened here. And, right now, today is the 100th anniversary 105th anniversary of the Board Rainier Massacre out in El Paso, where 15 men and boys were murdered by the Texas Rangers. That happened today. And then we look at the continuing history of violence against us to Uvalde. And a few months ago, I went to the DPS commission hearings with some of the Uvalde families. And a friend of mine, Monica Munoz Martinez, was there as well. We're going to talk about the Ranger bicentennials, which they're doing right now. But and what you see here is these families who lost 10-year-old kids. And the DPS, which is where the Texas Rangers are under, basically ignoring their calls. For reform, for taking for the fact that it took an hour and 14 minutes for them to enter, even though they knew they had people in there 10 minutes after the gunman entered the building. And 21 kids lost their lives. Texas Rangers were there too. So we look at this history and how much has really been done to rectify what happened in Uvalde, what happened in Fort Rainier, what happened in South Texas. And we see a continuing legacy of violence. And Uvalde was just last May. We're still dealing with the repercussions of that. The fact that DPS still will not admit that they were at fault, even though all of the evidence says so. But they do not, because the rules for the active shooters, you have to be in the building within 10 minutes. That's the rule. They waited an hour and 14 minutes to do anything. So when we look at what happened here, why this is important, because this history is not past. We're still dealing with the repercussions of this. We have descendants of the people who were murdered by the Texas Rangers here today. And this is something that, just having a reconciliation with the fact that this violence has occurred, and the fact that the state of Texas needs to offer its own proclamation that this happened, that these families were killed, and it was state-sponsored violence. That's what we do as Refusing to Forget. And so, mentioning all these things, the Refusing to Forget project, we do have our traveling exhibit. There's some flyers here. That's going to be opening next Thursday in McAllen at South Texas College, which was the exhibit that was up at the Bob Bullock years ago. And now we're going to travel it all over Texas, and STC is our first. So they're going to see basically the museum exhibit. They're going to open it up. That's going to be there, I believe, until April, where it moves on to San Antonio and other places. So we're moving it all around, and so that people can know and see the history that we have here. Of course, the Blood of San Diego is one of those histories. And the men that signed this, the men who started, were because they felt they were not being heard. And they weren't. That's the facts. They were not being heard. And when that happens, people will resort to violence. That's just the way it goes. And, Martin Luther King warned that 50 years later. But that is what it's like. So if you have nothing else, that's what you're going to end up doing. That's what's going to happen. So we're looking for better ways to do this now, right? Through civil rights work, through the telling of these histories. So just wanted to point that out. This is a long history. That this is an important marker to have. This is an important thing to remember, that we fought back. Because a lot of the histories before we really start into this doesn't talk about the people that fought back. Like Jacinto Trevino and Soto Pazania, Luis de la Rosa, all these people who stood up and fought back against the violence. And were basically banished from here. Yeah. But they fought. They fought back so that they can, and that is the spirit that Emilio is talking about. And of course, J.T. Canales, who ends up having the hearings on the Texas Rangers in 1919, takes those hearings and makes a further step into a few years later, into the creation of LULAC, of creating one of the first civil rights, Mexican American Latino civil rights organizations. because they knew that the violence wasn't going to get there. They had to have these, or they need to have civil rights, and they need to. And so LULAC was formed in Harlingen, primarily as one of the first documents. So all that comes from South Texas. All this resistance, all these thinkers, these intellectuals from here, from this area right here. So I just want to thank you guys for having us and enjoy some fun.